Hi, this is Phil Separano, Plumbing and Heating. What I want to talk to you about now is something that's been a problem on Long Island for, it's going to be 22 years this has been going on. 22 years I've been repairing, and replacing. Once we found out that it was a common problem, whereas, when you used to get a pinhole, you used to just repair that little spot and you were okay. But what we've learned is, in the past, I'd say 18 to 19 years, that's no good anymore. You gotta change the pipe from end to end, from fitting to fitting, and sometimes even beyond that. But this is what a typical pipe looks like with pinholes. These green spots, okay, they develop, I should say. Usually you can see them on the bottom of the pipe. For some reason, a lot of times they'll be on the bottom, but sometimes they'll be on the top too, and you won't be able to see them. Now this happens, it seems that it's been happening more, and I don't know this for a fact, but at least in my experience, it seems it's been happening more on the hot water pipes. In other words, once it comes out of your water heater or whatever you use to heat your domestic hot water, it seems to be mostly on the hot water lines. But I have also had a lot of them on the cold water lines. So, but all in all, I think for every 3 hot water lines I do, there's usually 1 cold water line. Again, that's my experience. So that's on your domestic water. But also, it's also been happening on heat lines. I've gotten quite a few heat lines, baseboard heating, or the lines down at the boiler, that also have pinhole leaks or developing pinhole leaks. Sometimes you won't see as green as this, but if you're ever in an area where you see water running down a wall, or you're walking past an area and you get sprayed in the face and you're like, where did that water come from? What you got to do is you got to feel around, okay, from where you were, and try to pinpoint it back to the pipe. So in other words, once you have it spraying in your hand, just keep on following the way the stream is coming. These are so fine, these pinholes, that the stream of water that comes out, you can't even see it. I explain it as being as thin as a strand of a spiderweb's web. It's very, very fine, so they're very hard to find sometimes. Sometimes it's spraying onto another pipe, and it'll fool you. So anyway, this is what you have to look out for. If you start to get, if you have a finished basement and you start to see stains, and you can remove the tiles, just move the tile out. If you start to see this in your boiler room or any other place, it's time to call your plumber and have him check it out. And the new thing that we're using now is PEX pipe, and that's eliminating the problem. And some people say, well, I want copper pipe. Well, I can understand. Believe me, when PEX pipe first came out, I was a little leery of it. And again, this is, to the best of my knowledge, PEX pipe has been used in Europe for about 30 years, maybe even longer. And we started to use it here in New York, in Nassau, about 15 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that. So, but I'm going to say about 15 years ago. And we first started using it on heating lines. And again, I was a little leery of it, but I used it and seemed to work great. Okay. Then, about 5 years ago, in 2006, I'd say, 2005, I started to use it. Well, I shouldn't say I started to use it, but it started to be used in domestic water, hot and cold. And again, I was a little leery of using it on domestic water. But what we found is that if you replace copper with copper pipe, and this happened to me just recently, I had a customer that had a slab house, and I had to chop his floor up, about 30 feet of floor from his kitchen. In other words, the boiler was in the middle of the room between the kitchen and the dining room, and the kitchen sink was over here, and the dining room, at the end of the dining room on the opposite side of the wall, was a bathroom. So now I had to go from the boiler, I had to trench a line, okay, in the concrete. Okay, that meant removing his flooring. Fortunately, it wasn't a new floor. It was a tile floor that had been there for about 20 years. And then I had to chop the floor to both points, to the kitchen, and go under, well, not under, I went through the wall and was able to get the pipe into the other side to connect to the bathroom. Anyway, so that was about 5 years ago, and again, I'm very meticulous when I do things, you know, any kind of work. I make sure my fittings are clean. I make sure my pipe is clean. I don't want any problems, believe me. I do not want problems. I take more time to make the job come out right. Okay, I'm not one of these speedster guys. But getting back to the problem, I cleaned my fittings. Now and I made sure that the pipe that I used was a coil of pipe, so there was only one line going that way for the hot, and because I did change both hot and cold, even though I believe it was the hot water line that was just leaking, I figured we got the floor open, might as well change both. So I had one line of hot, one line of cold going to the kitchen, to the bathroom, and one line of hot water and one line of cold water going to the kitchen. The only place there was a solder joint was right in the middle when I came out of the boiler, underground, and right here there was a T in order to go in opposite directions. And I also put what they call Armaflex on the pipe, because lime in the concrete has a tendency of eating away at copper. Although I did put the water lines way into the dirt, okay? But that's the way I am. I don't want to take any chances. So I also put Armaflex on it. So those pipes were protected. Well, it's got to be about 4 months ago now, 5 months ago now, I get a call, and the customer tells me that he's got water coming up in his kitchen floor. And I'm like, oh my God, did I screw up? Did I not solder those joints good? And I was really upset about it. And I went to the house, and what do I find but 4 years ago, he just had his kitchen remodeled. So he had a brand new floating floor, brand new kitchen cabinets. I had it, well, he took some of the flooring up, and I took some of it up. And it was in nowhere near where the pipe was, but depending on how the concrete slab is. Sometimes it might leak here and it'll show up over here. So my first thought was, can't be the copper pipe has a pinhole in it. It's got to be, I must have not soldered good for some reason. So I chopped up where I knew approximately the connection was. I chopped it up, ripped open the armor flex, dry as a bone. And I'm like, where could this be leaking from? So I went over to the kitchen cabinet, and because he had the kitchen redone, I thought maybe the kitchen guys did something where the water's leaking down, and, you know, you just don't see it. I opened up the kitchen cabinet and I hear psst. I'm like, where could that be coming from? Now, fortunately, when the kitchen guys did the kitchen, my pipes were coming up from the floor, so they did have to cut out some of the base of the kitchen cabinet itself, the floor of the kitchen cabinet. And I put my ear to it, and sure enough, I could hear it even louder. So since it was the base of the cabinet was already cut on the floor, I opened it a little bit more, but I really couldn't see anything, but it was moist. So I said, well, let me start chopping from where I hear it back. So now I closed the kitchen cabinet doors and started chopping the floor in front of the kitchen cabinet. I get down to the pipe, and I see it's wet. I take the insulation off, the armor flex off, I rip it off, and sure enough, there's a pinhole. Now this pipe is only 5 years old, and the pipe is not made in China. As far as I know, it's American pipe. So I had to rip the whole floor up and repipe it in PEX. And that's why now all I use is PEX. Anytime I replace any pipe, especially if they've had pinholes, I replace it in PEX. So that's why PEX is what should be used, okay? Because it can happen in a short amount of time. And what I've noticed also is I had another job just fast where people had their kitchen remodeled, and the people put in brand new ice maker line. And they called me up and they had a leak. And they said, well, this pipe has been replaced, 6 years ago. And this is before this job where I had to do the whole slab. So I replaced a small section of pipe. And it looked, although it's a much smaller pipe, it looked like this. But I thought, well, maybe, the guy touched it with what they call flux. Maybe he had flux on his hand, and he touched it. And maybe that ate through it or something. My mind wasn't on that a pipe at 6 years old had pinholes. So I fixed that pipe, and it was good for quite a while. And they called me back, and they had a leak on the opposite side of the kitchen where the kitchen sink was, because the refrigerator was here. And then on the opposite side was the kitchen faucet, and that's where they had tied in to the water for the ice maker. So they actually went up the wall, through the ceiling, and back down behind the wall to make the connections. So that one was lucky because we were able to take off a wall in the opposite room, and the beams were running the right way, so we didn't have to take down the ceiling, but we did have to take down some of the wall on the refrigerator side. And you did have to take off some paneling on the opposite wall. But so it's happened more than once. So best thing, go to PEX. Thank you.